What would you do if someone came to you and said, pack up all your stuff you've got right now, leave the city you're in, take your whole family and just go to a random country, to a plot of land that I have for you? How would you respond to that? Number one, who is the person talking to you? Number two, where is this place that you're asking me to go? Number three, if you want to go, I guess let's sign some papers. But then the person stops and says, no papers, no contracts, no sign on the dotted line. Just trust me, it's there for you. I don't know about you, but I need a little more stability and knowledge of what I'm doing to really pull that thing through. As crazy as that sounds, that literally happens to someone in the Bible in Genesis 12 called Abraham. Abraham is someone who's living in a place called Haran, and he's living with his family. He's a member of the community, and God comes to him and just says, leave everything you're doing, pack up, and move to somewhere else that I'll show you. And as crazy as that seems, there's actually a lot more similarities between Abraham and us that we might realize on the surface. In Genesis 12 and verse 1, God tells Abraham, leave your country, leave your father's house, and leave your people, the people that you know, and go somewhere else to a place that I've prepared for you. Essentially, what God is asking Abraham to do is create or adopt a new identity. If you think about it, those three things that God tells him to leave, the country, the people, and your father's house, it kind of makes us who we are. Think about it for a minute. Where are you from? I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee, United States of America. Whether I like those things or not, whether I love those things or not, they imply and they give me some kind of meaning as a human being. I'm from the South, I'm from Tennessee, that kind of thing. Even down to our football teams we cheer for. They just give us meaning. What about the people you know, the circles you run in, the acquaintances and connections you have? It also makes you a part of who you are. And then, of course, your family. God says, leave your father's house. Who your parents are and where you were born and the house you were raised in, all those things give us meaning. God says, leave all of that. Leave your comfort. Leave your identity and go essentially become a new person. And as Christians, it's not surprising to know that Jesus tells us a very similar thing. As a matter of fact, in Luke chapter 14, Jesus is giving a parable about someone who is having a wedding feast. And it's kind of like when we go to a wedding and then there's the wedding part where there's a minister up there and he says, kiss the bride, and they kiss and everybody cheers. And then the good part, which is when you go get food right at the reception. And then the bride and groom come in, everyone cheers for them, and they kind of mingle around. That's kind of what a wedding feast was for the Hebrews. So Jesus is saying that there's a king having essentially a wedding reception. And when it's time for the bride and groom to come in, no one shows up. And everyone has these grand, elaborate excuses to give to the king. When he busts open the door and says, everyone come in, it's time to celebrate the bride and the groom. Everyone gives these excuses. One person says, I just bought some new land. I would come to your party, but I just bought some new land. I gotta go check it out. Sorry, please excuse me. Another person says, I bought a bunch of livestock and I have to go get them checked, so give me a rain check. And the last person says, I just got married. It's such bad timing. I would come and be a part of this wedding banquet, but I just, you understand, right? I just got married. So the king, in response, just essentially goes out and beats the bushes and finds anyone and everyone who will come to this wedding just to have people there. But then Jesus launches into a dialogue with his followers about what it takes to actually follow him. And he says something very unnerving and shocking. He says, anyone who doesn't despise father or mother, doesn't despise his children, doesn't despise even himself, he can't be my disciple. And despising in that sense means consider someone else lower. So if we don't place Jesus as number one, then we can't be his disciple. He goes a step further and he says, as a matter of fact, if you don't deny yourself, lower yourself, take up your cross and follow me, you also can't be my disciple. So just as God tells Abraham, leave your comfort, leave your identity, become someone new, Jesus is telling us the exact same thing. If you don't consider all those things less than me, if you don't find your identity in me, then you're not worthy of being my disciple. The second thing that God tells Abraham in Genesis 12 and verse 1 is to go to a place that he has never ever been before, and he doesn't really know if it's there for him or not. Again, we live in an age of contracts. We live in an age of having insurance, where if something bad happens to us, at least we have some kind of fallback plan. And the good part about having a contract is if two parties agree to something and we both sign the dotted line, if one person doesn't hold up your end of the bargain, we have a right over that person to say you didn't complete your side, so I don't have to take any fall. In Abraham and God's case, it's sort of different, because God comes to him and says, go to this unknown place, and there's no signing of contracts. There's no, God gives him an insurance policy. It's just, trust me. Not even a handshake, just trust me that it's there. How scary and unnerving is that, not having a backup plan? And I know what you might be thinking. How do we know that Abraham really didn't know Canaan wasn't there? Maybe Abraham had been to Canaan before, right? Well, later in the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11, the Hebrew writer tells us Abraham literally did not know where he was going. That's super scary, because now I have to have it GPSed out. I have to know what road it's on. I have to know what room it's in. All these details I have to plan out before I even make a road trip. So imagining thousands of years before electricity and cars, making a several 100-mile trip with you and your family, and hoping this place is there eventually when you get there, and that you can live there. But again, Jesus tells us something similar in John chapter 14. In John 14, Jesus' disciples finally get that Jesus really is going to be gone. He's really going to leave them, and they're going to be essentially by themselves. But he gives them some peace and some consolation, and he says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And where I'm going, you can follow me. You know where I'm going. And that's comforting to a point, and we know now he's talking about heaven. He's going to prepare a place for us. He says, in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. Heaven sounds great, and we all want to get there. Hopefully we're taking steps to get there. But here's where the similarity between us and Abraham comes into play. Do you know where heaven is? Could you give me a roadmap to get to heaven? Do you know what's going to be in heaven? Have you known anyone that's been to heaven and come back and said, oh yeah, for sure it's there? We don't know that heaven is really there. All I really have is trust in God. I have faith that God's going to come through and that there's really a heaven at the end of our lives and the resurrection. I hope that's true. But every single one of us, we're taking this trip and journey through life to get to a place like Abraham we've never even been before. And then finally, what God tells Abraham, number 3, is basically you're preparing for the future. I want to give you blessings. I want to make you a great nation. And through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. You'll have a great family. Later on in Genesis, he says that your descendants, your family, will be as innumerable as the stars in heaven or as the sands on the seashore. That sounds awesome. That sounds great. But here's the problem. In Abraham's lifetime, he never sees the fulfillment of those grand promises. In Abraham's whole lifetime, as a matter of fact, when he gets to Canaan, it says that Canaanites already lived there. Makes sense, right? Canaanites live in Canaan. But God had promised Abraham that that whole land would be his. And in Genesis 12 and verse 7, he takes Abraham and he talks to him in the land of Canaan when he finally gets there and says, to your descendants I will give this land. As anticlimactic as that seems, Abraham dies not having seen those promises that God gave to him. He finally gets an heir. He gets a son, which is a great blessing, but there's no great nation. There's no millions of descendants, and there's no blessing the entire world through him. Abraham dies having seen none of those things, which sounds awful, but in another way, we're in the exact same boat, because God's promised us amazing things. And while we have physical and spiritual blessings now in the church and all these things, there's still something greater that we're waiting on. I want to read to you Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 8. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, again, not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who was promised. Therefore from one man, Abraham, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars in heaven, as many innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. Here's the crazy part in the New Testament. Because eventually Abraham does become a great nation. His descendants become the nation of Israel, and his descendants are scattered literally all over the world. But that's not the end of the promise there. Because God promised that through Abraham, all the nations of the earth would be blessed, not just his nation, not just the Jewish nation. We come to find out in the New Testament that Christ is the fulfillment of that prophecy. Through Jesus, all the nations of the earth are now blessed, and they're given Abraham's blessing. As a matter of fact, in Galatians 3, Paul writes, if you have faith of Abraham, if you have Abraham's faith in Christ, we are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So think about that for a minute. Even though Abraham died not having seen God's great plans and God's great promises fulfilled, we are now blessed because he was faithful. And I want to draw two applications for us, and then we'll close here. Number one, something better is coming for us. The church is great. It's a great spiritual blessing. And everything that God does for us now is amazing, and it's a great blessing. But like Abraham, there is something better coming. And it's so easy to be wrapped up in our physical things now. I want my job to go well. I want to have a big house. I want to have the best car. I want to have whatever it is. It's easy to be caught in those things, but we have to remember the best is yet to come. God's plans will be fulfilled after us. And number two, others can still benefit from watching us move. Just like Abraham showed faith and he packed up and he went and left his old country and went to a new one, others found out who God was. And through his faithfulness, now even we have a chance of being with God forever in heaven. So think about this. As we are packing up, metaphorically, our lives in anticipation for a new life in heaven, how many other people can we bless? And how many others can we inspire to live that same kind of life? And just like Abraham, our showing of faith can inspire them to follow in his footsteps.